I'm sure you get all the time. Well, here's what I loved about the movie, is you actually managed to work in the haunted carnival into the film, as well as a haunted clown. That was a great reference to Poltergeist, by the way. And also, what you're saying about the 80s look to it, the stop motion effect, I really enjoyed that look, the movement it gave off, especially with the little girl. The fact that it didn't have to be stop motion, but it still had that really creepy look to it. How exactly did you accomplish that? Especially considering today we have digital and like all sorts of effects that can be done in a computer. Did you combine any digital effects with the more practical method of the 80s?
No, we looked at it pretty much as a movie that used modern technology, but as I said, we didn't have a lot of resources, and so it was a hit and miss kind of a thing of getting the kid to move a certain way and then trying to find a way to present it in a way that seems offbeat and weird and involving frame rates and stuff like that. And we had some very talented people working for us doing that stuff. And the little girl character, who was actually played by a little boy, is a total ripoff of a character in a Mario Bava movie called Kill Baby Kill, down to the wig and everything. And no one ever notices, but it makes me feel happy.
Hello. With your films, they all seem to be somewhere on the spectrum of horror and comedy, and this film, especially early on, a lot of really, really horrific scenes wind up getting a big laugh from the audience. Do you intend a laugh or a scare early on, or do you just put the image up and hope for a reaction?
Well, I used to do that. It doesn't work. You can't just hope for a reaction. I was influenced at an early age by horror pictures by James Whale, who used to contrast horror and comedy in the same scene. If you ever see The Invisible Man, it's a movie where the Invisible Man is absolutely nuts, and he does terrible things to people, and he seems to be doing it in a jocular fashion. And you sort of laugh about it, and you throw some ink at some guy, and you go, oh, that's kind of funny, he's an anarchist. And then he beats the guy to death with a stool. And you go, that's such a great guy. And I find that horror and comedy are sometimes so closely aligned that you'll get a laugh in places you don't want to get a laugh unless you can find a way to angle it to put the laugh where you want it. That's why in the movies in the 30s, there used to be comedy relief horror films. It was a standard thing where you would have a comedy character who would be scared and everybody laugh at him, and don't laugh at him, and all the scary stuff. Obviously now things are a little more sophisticated, so it becomes a little more subtle. And to me, horror is absurd and comedy is absurd. So those two things are so closely aligned that it seems to me that one supports the other.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Dante. Thank you for bringing The Hole. I thought it was fantastic. My favorite of your films, though, would have to be Inner Space. Can you share anything about the making of Inner Space?
Well, Inner Space was originally going to be directed by Robert Zemeckis. And Spielberg gave it to Zemeckis, but he didn't want to do it, so I got it. But the reason I got it was that before I did Explorers, I had started developing Inner Space with Peter Cooper, but it wasn't a comedy. It was a straight spy movie with the same plot, and it didn't work, I thought. So I went off and made another picture. When I came back, they had hired a writer named Jeff Bone, who did the third Indiana Jones movie, who had turned it into a comedy, and his concept was, what would happen if you shrunk down Jerry Lewis and injected him inside Dean Martin? That I understood. So when we actually went to make the movie, which was great because we had some money and it was an Amblin picture, and whenever you made an Amblin picture, you had Steven sort of protecting you from the studio. And this cast was, they were just so much fun to work with. I mean, Marty Short and Dennis Quaid have like only one scene that they're in together, but they were always together on the set because they were ad-libbing with each other off screen and creating their performances. And so it's an interesting movie in that it's kind of like the movies they make today, where it's really basically a special effects extravaganza, but it's also a human story. And I find that in a lot of the movies today, the human story kind of gets lost, and it's all about the effects.
Thank you so much.
How much protection have you gotten from the studio over the years? I mean, how much interference have you had to deal with, and how have you found, I guess, ways around that?
Well, when I made my first studio picture, it was the Twilight Zone movie, and there was a terrible accident during the making of that picture, and it happened very early on before the movie was actually really in production. It was a separate unit that had the accident. And the studio wanted the movie, and it was going to be Spielberg's first picture for Warner Brothers, and they said, we're going to make the movie anyway, which surprised me because I thought they were going to cancel it. But what was interesting was that because it was such a sort of a hot potato, nobody was really in charge of it. And nobody really wanted to take responsibility for it. So I made this picture, my first movie on a studio lot, with all these technicians, and these great sets, and all this stuff. And I thought, boy, this making movies for studios is pretty good. I mean, they give you all these great people, and they leave you alone, and you can make. And it was, my episode was pretty weird. So it was like, wow, they're not saying anything. They're not complaining. I didn't realize that isn't really the way it works, because when I made my next picture for them, they were very happy to explain why it wasn't going to be any good. You always have that relationship with the studio, but it's their money. So, you can't say, well, what are you telling me what to do? It's their money. So, but the 80s was an okay period. I mean, you could really get along. It wasn't until the late 90s that studios had become corporatized and became much more interfering than they had been previously. And so now you'll find a lot of filmmakers who feel that their movies have been compromised by studios and by people who frankly have no right to tell them how to make their movie, because they wouldn't actually go see that movie. Their job is they're making the movie, they're going to tell you how to make it. But you're getting advice from people who don't care about that kind of picture and wouldn't go see it. So it does make it a little more difficult.
Go ahead.
What comes out of your hole?
Well, that's
follow-up question.
the first time that I introduced the hole to somebody after it had been run. I think there had been a review on Harry Knowles that said, I've seen Joe Dante's hole and it doesn't stink.
Follow-up question.
I hope it's as good as the first one.
Oh, it is. Really, what comes out of your hole? Like, what are you scared of? What would be in there?
Not working is one. Politics scares me. What's going on scares me. What the next election scares me. The people who are currently running the Congress scare me. And I'll just tell you that if you want to really see a horror story, you just watch the Republican convention this year. You will never have seen as many lunatics in one place since Bedlam.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much for bringing your fantastic film tonight, by the way. Quick question. I noticed you had some very beautiful and elegantly made sets, especially at the end of this film. Would you mind talking about some of your inspirations behind the creation of those and possibly some of the process of creating?
Well, again, it's we had a great art director and not a lot of money, and so the sets are mainly forced perspective. They're not as big as they look, and they are occasionally against green screens. So part of the set that you see isn't quite real. And we just tried to use what I thought were fairly limited means to back up the drama of what had happened in the previous lives of these characters before we met them. Frankly, I thought it was a little stagey. So I'm happy that it works, but I think that given more resources and more money, I think I could have done a much more elaborate job of it.
Just one more.
Hi, me again.
As far as you were going about what true horror is, Republican convention and everything like that, it reminded me of Homecoming. I'm wondering, would you ever want to go and do something similar to that in the same vein where it's not really comic at all?
Well, after I did Homecoming, I did one called The Screwfly Solution, which is really not funny. It's really grim. That's a story I'd always wanted to shoot as a feature, and after I did it for TV, I realized this is so depressing, nobody would come to it as a feature. Homecoming was just a movie that I made with my friend Sam Hamm because we were pissed off that the media was just cheerleading for the war and nobody was asking any questions. So we did this, we had this opportunity, this golden opportunity for this series where they were giving you money and hardly any money. And the goal was to get people to work for nothing by saying you can do whatever you want. And so we used this opportunity with this screed, this really very unsubtle propaganda about how pissed off we were. So, yeah, I mean, it's fun to do that kind of thing. I did a movie called The Second Civil War for HBO, which you can find somewhere, which is made in 1997, and when you run it today, it looks like it was made last week. All the issues are still current, and I love doing those kind of pictures, but, you know, there's not that many that you get to do, especially when you're typed.